Hello everyone. As I've said in my other support conversation rankings, support conversations are a great way to get to know your characters and see them interact with the other characters. Now, for today's video, I will be ranking each and every one of Claude's supports to see which one is the best. These supports will be ranked on the character development the characters involved go through, and how well these supports are written all throughout. If you liked the video here today, like my video, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more Fire Emblem and Zelda content in the future. Now, without further ado, let's rank all the support conversations of the leader of the Golden Deer, Claude von Regan. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Raphael's character, but I don't think Raphael is really the issue with this support conversation. The issue arose when I was taking notes for the video. I literally couldn't find anything of value to this support. It's very bland, and I can't really think of anything that it does well for these characters. This support doesn't really develop either Claude or Raphael, and overall, I just don't really like it that much. And the writing, like I said before, was very bland, so that is why it's last place on this list. I feel like the support conversation between Claude and Cyril definitely could be better if it was a little longer. Sure, Cyril's not the best character in the world, but if it was longer, it could better develop these characters. Sure, there might be a little bit of development for Claude. He learns what life in Elmira was really like. If it was longer, it definitely would have benefited more because it would develop Claude more and develop Cyril. Now, with a lot of Cyril supports, it tends to focus on Rhea very heavily, which often means it's very repetitive and sometimes even boring. But with Claude's support Cyril, it has context on why it's there because Claude is very curious about Rhea in the game. Overall, it's a very mediocre support that definitely could be better. Similar to Raphael's support Claude, this support is kind of interesting to me. I wouldn't go out of my way to call it bad, but I wouldn't go out of my way to call it good either. The format of this support conversation is very basic. The first half focusing on two different aspects of these characters, and the last part of the support being the obligatory promise section, where they promise to do something after the war is over. And I get that is the main format for support conversations in Three Houses, but it doesn't even do that good of a job of bringing out new information about these two characters. Yeah, there's a little bit of new stuff, but it's mostly just stuff we can find other places. The ending is not the worst, however. At least it doesn't start with entrusting the future of Folan to his friends, an issue I'll talk about a little later. Claude's support with Annette kind of annoys me if I'm going to be honest. The most annoying part of this support conversation comes at the beginning with Annette's creepity creep song. I get that stuff like that is part of Annette's character, but the fact that Claude overanalyzes it and thinks it's a real song with a deep meaning, it's not really good and it's honestly kind of boring. And the creepity creep song portion of this support conversation takes up over half of it, so over half of it is boring to me. The last part of this support conversation is alright though. Claude's poetry isn't as annoying because no one is singing it, and it actually has meaning, and when Annette figures it out, it bonds them closer together. So that little development at the end is basically the reason it's not last place on this list. Like Claude's supports with Raphael and Leone before it, there is not much of interest here. But I do like the support more than Claude's support with Raphael and Leone, mostly because it works well at being a simple support. There is nothing particularly grasping my attention with this support conversation, but I feel like there's not much negative about it either. It might not be the best support out there, but it does an alright job of what it does, and there's even some funny Claude jokes in there, bringing it up to the number 11 spot. Claude's support with Lysithea brings us into the top 10, and I feel like this support has its good moments, but it's pretty much average everywhere else. My favorite parts of this support is when Claude treats Lysithea like a little child. It's kind of funny and it really works well. There's a little bit of character development with Lysithea. Lysithea learns not to push herself too hard with her magic and her studies, which really works for Lysithea's character because she overworks herself due to her shortened lifespan. I really like the ending between these two characters as well. It might start out very similar to Claude's and Lysithea's other endings, but I like the fact that Claude is the one basically to help Lysithea cure herself of her shortened lifespan. But aside from the character development for Lysithea, the pretty good ending, and the funny Claude jokes, there is not much else of interest here, and it's pretty mediocre. Claude and Balthus' support conversation makes it to number 9. And with this support, it has a very backstory-heavy focus. The good part of it being more of a backstory focus, you learn a lot more about Balthus' past as a member of the Kupala tribe in the mountains. His parents' backstories are explained really well, especially because Claude is a very inquisitive character, so it really makes sense instead of just being a random background dump. With Claude, it tries going deeper into his backstory, but it really doesn't provide any new information to make it worthwhile. Another downfall of it being a backstory support is that it can't really develop Balthus or Claude because the majority of information given is from the past. But overall, it is a fine addition to Claude's many support conversations. Again, like I said before, this support between Claude and Shamir does a good job of revealing backstory for these characters because of Claude's personality. Again, there's not much development here, but I feel like it works better because it's not just an information dump like Balthus and Claude's support was. And as characters, Claude and Shamir work surprisingly well, even though they're completely different. There are sprinkles of good moments in there, but I don't think any of it is really that mind-blowing for me to bring up here, so that's kind of the major flaw from that. I think the biggest positive with this support is that it does a good job of letting you learn about Claude throughout the game. You learn about Claude's belief and a big part of his backstory, including why he's such a schemer and why he is insincere with other people. And all of that is great, but the ending doesn't really clash well with the later parts of the support. The S support between Claude and Byleth is fine on its own, it's just that the ending doesn't really match what's supposed to happen with Byleth and Claude based on what they say. Obviously, since it's an S support, they promise to get married and stuff, but then they don't. The ending between Claude and Byleth is barely passable as a combined ending, and it ends up feeling a lot more like their solo endings in Verdant Wind. They barely interact in the ending. All they do is they help defeat the remnants of the Imperial army together, and other than that, all they do is just based on their base endings. And all that basically contradicts what Claude said he was going to do after the war. But since the rest of it is pretty good, it makes its way to number 7 on this list. Just missing out in the top 5, Lauren supports Claude probably has the biggest amount of character development so far on this list. Lawrence and Claude are pretty much always at odds during White Clouds, and through this support conversation, they learn to understand each other at the end. I like the writing here too. It's very consistent in its writing and its story structure. I like the ending here too as well. It shows great teamwork between Lawrence and Claude, who, for most of the game, did not like each other. And you even learn a little bit about the houses of the Lesser Alliance, which is another good part. And overall, it's pretty solid. There's not really much of an issue that I can think to criticize, and it does a pretty good job all throughout. And that's why it's all the way up here on this list. Claude support with Petra moves us into number 5. To me, the biggest strength of this support is that Claude and Petra have very similar personality traits and aspirations. They both want to make their respected nations, Bridget for Petra and Almyra for Claude, have good relations with Fodlan. With the actual support, it starts out kinda slow with Claude just learning to climb a tree, but as you go on, you get to learn more and more about Petra's goals, so I like that part of it. The ending isn't half bad either. Might start off the same with Claude entrusting the future of Fodlan to his friends, but instead of going to Almyra, he goes to Bridget, which in and of itself is pretty unique. But I think the similarities between Claude and Petra are the reason it's this high on the list. Out of all the supports with Claude investigating a certain character, I think this one does it best. And a big reason I think that is because Claude actually gets it right. Not because the character, in this case Flayn, tells him, but because he actually manages to figure it out. Not only because he realized that Sedith is Flayn's father, but also he might have figured out that Flayn is actually Seth Lean. Also, a little detail that's not super important, but I like to bring up here. I like how Sedith shows up here to be part of the support, even though it's not one of his. One thing I'm not too fond of is that there's not much development for Claude and Flayn, even though there definitely could be. But that doesn't matter too much, because there's actually 2 separate endings. One if Sedith died, and one if Sedith didn't die. Personally, I prefer the ending where Seteth doesn't die, because it's a very nice ending for Claude and Lane, and it's kind of funny too. And overall, a very solid number 4. Marianne's support Claude brings us into number 3. And this is one of the only Claude supports that actually has good development. This support does a really good job showing the parallels between Claude and Marianne, who, by first glance, are completely different as characters, but when you get into it, they're very similar, with both of them holding a part of their origin a secret. But the difference is Claude, as said in the actual game, cast aside his burden, whereas Marianne just held onto it, which lets Claude teach Marianne to let go of her burden. And overall, the support between Marianne and Claude is really good. Honestly, Claude and Hilda's support isn't what I thought was going to be number 2 on this list, but it definitely deserves it. Claude and Hilda are very, very similar as characters, so even though the writing might be kinda basic, it works really well. I especially like the part towards the end of it where Claude and Hilda point out how insincere they are, which doesn't really happen in many other supports they have. It might not be the saddest or even the best support ever, but it definitely makes for one of the best Claude supports based on how similar they are and how much they make sense as a pairing, if you will. And there is only one more support to talk about, and the number 1 spot is... Yes, Claude support with Ingrid makes number 1 on the list. And it has everything I want from a support too. It has great development, great writing, and there's even some good funny moments in there too. Starting with the writing side of things, it does a really good job of making a character I like, Ingrid, seem very annoying. And I mean that in the best way possible too, because that's how Claude views her for most of the support. My favorite part was in the mid to late part of the support, when Claude and Ingrid sarcastically acted like how they wanted the other one to act. And they end up learning that they don't mind each other's flaws all that much. On the ending side of things, I probably like it more than any of Claude's other similar endings. Still starts out the same way, but I feel like it has a little bit of charm to it to make it unique enough. And overall, it's very strong. I knew from the beginning that it was going to be my number 1, and it is definitely deserving. Thank you so much for watching. Claude is a great character in Three Houses, so I thought a support conversation ranking was due for him, and I hoped you liked my list. In my eyes, Claude supports aren't as strong as the first 2 character support rankings I did, Dorothea and Dimitri. Most of Claude's endings were very similar to each other, and the supports in general weren't as strong. I feel like the only one I really liked was number 1. But negativity aside, Claude still has a very solid set of support conversations. My next support conversation ranking won't be for a bit, but my next character I'll be covering is Seteth. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time.